Song for the Imps. How about a song for the Imps? There we go then. Come on, let's get some of the lads together. Let's have a good idea. Okay, you're on. Come on, fellas. Get around a go. Let's have a good go. Come on, then. You ready? Come on, you lot. Come on, then.
Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The Imps are here to stay. Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The Imps are here to stay. Lincoln City are the team, the Reds is their name. Stinsel Bank is their home ground and football is their game. So come and cheer them on, you lads, support them all the way. Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The Imps are here to stay. Oh, 'tis our...
Morning all, how we doing? Live and direct from the Lincolnshire Wolds once again. I always seem to start in the same place, on the track opposite the house. But that's not really very central, is it? That's going the wrong way now. There we go. I've had this hat 20 years, moth eaten, but it's my dog walking hat, my dog walking coat, as those who are regulars will now know. So it's a quick dog walk this morning. I always say that. It always ends up being about half an hour, but it does depend very much on the dog, who at the moment is doing a stand rather than a walk, and they're not quite as entertaining for me. Dog stand. But anyway, so I'm on the podcast tonight with Ben, where we'll be covering any news that happens today before anybody reads into anything and thinks I know anything. I don't. The club is very, very tight in terms of leakiness these days. Very, very little comes out, which I think, you know what, I don't think it's a bad thing, because then you don't get those clunges who think that they're in the know going online, you know, trying to make a statement that's been uttered around for a couple of days, but they're the first ones to put it on social media. Those people annoy me. They do. And I think the fact that the club's tight, the fact that we don't get to hear anything before it happens is a positive and a negative. I think it's a positive because it allows the club to do their business without the pressure of somebody going on, that's not Tyler Walker, every time they put something on, every time the club puts a post on social media. However, similarly, it means that people are starved of potential rumours, and then you get then the fear of, well, Tom Hopper might be going, which clearly hasn't come from Lincoln City. It's clearly come from Colchester United or the player's agent or something like that. So that comes out, but there's no rumours of people coming in, and then fans are going, oh, we need another striker. No shit, Sherlock. Do you know what I mean? Tom Hopper goes, we sell our captain and our striker, and you think, well, we're going to go into February without another striker. No way we sanction Tom leaving without one coming in. And if we do, it would be suicide. Not going to happen. Absolutely not going to happen. So I'm going to touch, and also, and I know, in massive respect, I appreciate you following all the time, but surely we need two more strikers. We're not going to sign two strikers if we sell Tom. Certainly not two strikers that are likely to play. And if people are saying we need two strikers, but we also need to keep Charlie Kendall, well, that would then be four strikers when we play one up top. It's not going to happen. I think if we sell Tom, we buy a striker, a single striker, and then we go into the final games of the season with Jovan McCarmer, Charlie Kendall, Ben House, and a new striker. Potentially one of Kendall or McCarmer go out. I can see us actually keeping McCarmer and sending Kendall out, because I think he's more of a target towards the end of a game, and I think his development's actually surprised quite a few people. So look, let's talk about Tom Hopper. That's what I'm here for. That's what we're meant to be discussing. I'm walking around in circles, man, at the minute. Just a minute. Charlie, come on. So news broke yesterday, first of all through Football League World, that Tom Hopper might be on the move. Now, the modern journalists on the likes of Football League World and teams like that, and sites like that, now have contacts. They have contacts with agents. Media is changing. It's not local media now that tend to break news. It can be these aggregator sites, and when you see exclusive, often that news has to come from somewhere. Football League World can't just put exclusive and make something up. The real AFL can't put exclusive and make something up. What happens is they tend to check their news with agents, or agents will release a story. Agents aren't always true. It might be they're trying to hurry a transfer along, so they'll say one of their players is linked with somebody. That goes out on social media, or it goes out on one of these sites, and then when it doesn't come off, they say, oh, these sites make stuff up. You're not allowed. News now are really stringent on that sort of thing. So if Football League will put an exclusive out, it's come from somewhere. So through a couple of contacts I have, not at the football club, I might add, very, very tight ship. But through a contact of mine, Ryan Whelan, who you may well know, managed to verify that it looks like it's pretty solid. And then obviously a couple of hours later, Michael Horton, I think, got confirmation from the club. Tom Hopper looks like he's moving to Colchester United. So let's look at that transfer first of all at face value. Is it a good one for the club? Well, there'll be a nominal fee. They'll pay up the final few months of his contract. I'd be really surprised if that's anything more than kind of 10, 15 grand tops. Would really, really surprise me. I think it's a good move for Tom. As I understand it, his partners from that way on, from when he was down in Southend, yeah, I think he's been looking for a move back that way at the end of his contract. Not angling for a move. That's not Tom. I don't think he's been pushing for anything. But I think it makes perfect sense. I don't think he would have got a new contract at the end of this season, because 3.5 years are up. It's been a mixed bag for 3.5 years, which I'll come on to in a moment. So it's not a move that surprises me. I didn't see Tom getting a move elsewhere in League One, unless potentially it was a club like Cambridge United, but then they've already got their big target striker, haven't they, in Ironside, whatever his name is, Joe Ironside, something like that. So it doesn't surprise me that he's going into League Two. That's not a slur on Tom. I'll come on to that. I've heard that a couple of League Two clubs are after him. I remember talking to Danny Cowley, name drop. But I spoke to him after the Portsmouth game where we were beaten 2-0, and he talked a little bit about players. Danny loves to chat. He's a lovely guy. And he mentioned Tom Hopper. I think Tom had got some stick from our fans around that time. And Danny said how he couldn't understand it because Tom was the perfect footballer. He made the game easier for players around him. We saw that in 2020-21 season. I don't think we've really seen it a huge amount since. But if he can drop into League Two and make the game a little bit easier, maybe players are two, maybe have someone feeding off him, maybe only have one responsibility rather than constant chasing down and having to win the big headers. Potentially, I think that there's a decent League Two striker in there. But I say I think that Tom's latter career at Lincoln has been badly affected by injuries. I think that's fair to say. Look, we look at the 2021 season, and he took some stick, by the way, that season. We needed another striker. We were top of the fucking league, and people were on Tom's case. And it was like when we won the title with John Akindi, people were criticising John Akindi because he wasn't scoring enough goals, but we won the league. For me, if you win the league, your 11 players that start on a regular basis have done their jobs. No questions asked. And anyone that goes back and says John Akindi was lazy, well, we won the league title. Jesus Christ. You can talk all you want about your Mark Stallards and your Jamie Forresters and players like that. We didn't win anything with those players. If you win something with a striker, whatever that striker does is right. We didn't win anything with Tom Hopper. But in 2020-21, we'll call it the playoff season because I keep repeating numbers and it's doing my head in. So in the playoff season, we got within 90 minutes of going into the championship, which would have been the first time since 1961-62. So to say that Tom Hopper didn't do a job or didn't score enough goals or didn't do this or didn't do that, frankly, is bollocks, because we came within moments of going into the championship. So we had a good season that season. And look, let's not forget he scored 2 goals that for me will live forever in my memory as a Lincoln City fan. The first was the first goal back in the stadium. Okay, it was only 3,000 fans in against Sunderland in the playoff semi-final. But when he got that goal, the place erupted. It was a really emotional time. I think we hadn't seen football live for 14, 15 months or whatever. And he got that goal. And then obviously the goal in the second leg as well, which, I freely admit, cried at the end of that game. And it was emotion. It wasn't that, I'm particularly like that over football. But I think it was the topsy-turvy nature of the season. We'd been runaway leaders, then we dropped away, and then we got through the semi-final, and then we got through the first leg, and then we conceded 2, and it looked like we were going out, and then he popped up with that goal, and when the final whistle went, I just couldn't help it. It was just like this outpouring. And I think also it had something to do with the fact we hadn't been in the ground for so long. It was just everything. But that was Tom Hopper as well. And I thought that season, actually, he did very well for us. I thought that he was heavily criticised. But we know that he picked up an injury. We know that he picked up an injury towards the end of that season. He missed a period. We had then Callum Morton in. And when you don't have Tom Hopper and you realise what he did for the team, that Callum Morton didn't, and we didn't have a threat at all going forward. And you can point to recruitment a little bit on that. Perhaps Morton was injured, so there was a lot on Hopper. I think there's a fallacy there for the 2 for 2. I think you have to have 3 strikers in your squad, even if you only play one up top. But that was Tom's best season in a Lincoln City shirt. Obviously, he had arrived just before COVID. He'd had a slowish start, put 2 away against Burton. And I thought, and up to that point, I thought, he's a decent Lincoln City striker who could go on to have a lot of success. Then last season was an absolute write-off for Tom. He scored 1 league goal at home, I think 2 league goals in total. And his only home league goal came on the last day of the season when we beat Crewe 2-1. I think he played 22 games all in all. Some of those were coming off the bench. When he did come back from injury, I thought that he looked relatively ineffective. But he was out for so long, he had no real chance to get back up to speed when he came back in the team. And I remember going away to Shrewsbury, and I think we went 3-5-2 in the last kind of 20 minutes to try and create something with Marquis and Hopper up top, and we didn't get a sniff. And at that point, I thought, well, he's been affected by injury. This season's his season. And I think to a degree that's why he was given the captaincy, because Mark Kennedy knew what Tom could do from the playoff season. So he knew how important he could be. He is a great character, which I'll come on to as well. And, that's something that I say and despise in equal measure, because nice blokes don't always win your football matches. It's irrelevant. But he's a nice guy. He's a leader around the place. He's made mistakes in his past and bounced back from that. I think he's a good guy. And I think that might be partly why he was made captain, because actually Mark Kennedy thinks, well, if I get the Tom Hopper from the playoff season in this Lincoln City side, with a couple of the younger players, the likes of Ben House, etc., around him, then I think that we could do relatively well. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened like that. I had the pleasure of speaking to Tom pre-season at an event, and he was talking about his injury woes and how he was perfectly fit. He was raring to go. He looked fit. He looked happy. And that hasn't happened. He's been injured again, in and out the side again. He's arguably now our second choice number 9, behind a guy who 12 months ago was playing for Eastleigh in the National League. That's no slur on Ben House, by the way. He's come on in leaps and bounds. But I think it speaks volumes about where Tom is at present. So in terms of impact to the squad, this is one outgoing I think 90% of people could probably have predicted. Without being rude to Tom, kind of coming to the end of his Lincoln City cycle, as Chris from the podcast would say. He's coming to the end of his Lincoln City pathway and looking for the next stage of his career. And it's a move closer to his partner's family. It's a move closer to where he considers home. Probably in terms of League Two, it's moving into a league that's a little bit more befitting of what he can offer at the moment. In terms of his physicality, in terms of probably wanting to play alongside somebody up front. And, he turned down a move into League Two quite famously under Danny and Nicky Cowley. When we were in League Two, we tried to sign Tom Hopper. I think he was at Scunthorpe at the time, and he chose to go to Southend because he wanted to continue to test himself in League One. And I think, if I'm brutally honest, I think that's a really good reflection of Tom himself. He's always wanted to apply himself as high as he can. I remember, again, and sorry to name drop, I shouldn't do it, but Danny speaking about that transfer, whether it was to me or in the media or something like that, and saying how, would we want to sign Tom Hopper if he wanted to come into League Two when he had League One offers on the table? We'd still sign him, but you'd have more of a question mark over his character. What's his motivation for not testing himself as highly? He's a great guy, and I can't stress that enough. And it's why I find it quite, not hurtful, but I find it a little bit disrespectful when I see things like good riddance, Tom shit, blah, 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 really brutal. His goals to games ratio isn't as high as you would hope for a striker. I buy that, I get that, understand it. But the way that he's been utilised by Lincoln in many respects is the same way that John Akindi was utilised by Lincoln, in that it wasn't always about being the goal-getter. These weren't playing in a similar position to Mo Isa, where everything was created to put the ball at his feet, 12 yards from goal. That was never it. Akindi and Hopper have both been functional strikers, have been hard-working strikers, have been strikers who have been expected to chase. They've been strikers who have been sometimes expected to just hold the ball, not to plough a lone furrow up top. To a degree, a little bit like Matt Reid, I think, as well, was expected to do the same. And Reid's goals in the National League were very good, but not so much when he came into the Football League, but he was still a hero to the club. And I think it is disrespectful to Tom for what he's done off the field. He's been a great ambassador for the club. Again, on a personal level, the way that he welcomed my nephew, a fellow Boston boy, to the game, Doncaster, earlier in the season, he was absolutely brilliant. He always had time for people. He's always well spoken, and I think in that respect he'll be a loss. But like I said, that type of player doesn't necessarily win you games on the field. And we're at a point now where we need players who are going to impact when they come on. Trying not to be disrespectful, I don't think Tom's had a significant impact on the first team in the last 18 months. Not really. He may have done off the seat, behind the scenes. He may have been a great guy around the changing rooms, but a lot of the fans that are saying things like Tom's shit, which is wrong, are the fans that they see what happens on a Saturday, and that's where they make their judgment, and that's fine. That's acceptable. A lot of fans do that. And if you were purely judging Tom Hopper on the last 18 months of Lincoln City, the harsh truth is, and probably by his own admission, it hasn't been good enough. It hasn't. And I think we've seen that since Ben House has been injured, since the turn of the year. Yeah, I think we've looked particularly shot shy. And all the good stuff that Tom brought in the playoff season, for me, he hasn't been able to. Might be because he hasn't had the likes of Brennan Johnson and George Grant and Morgan Rogers putting balls into key areas. But he was very much a defensive centre forward in the playoff season, and we needed that, and it worked well for us. But I think that we've needed something different, and he hasn't offered it this season. So that's my thoughts on Tom. Let's have a quick look at some of your thoughts. If you've said morning, Connor, Owen, Sean, morning to you. Kate Jackson, I hope you're well. All I'll say about the Tom Hopper situation is that we hopefully get someone who scores consistently as a replacement. Tom did a lot of things well, but scoring goals wasn't one of them. I don't buy this notion that we have to sign a proven goal scorer, because in inverted commas, because there's no such thing. And I said it in an article the other day. There are no good and bad footballers, only good and bad environments. Different tactics will bring different things out of different players. It's why some players like Paul Mullin go all of their career without standing out, and then they move to a team and suddenly start scoring for fun. It's why Max Waters was woeful at Doncaster, but great at Crawley if you played in the right way, played to your strengths, all that sort of stuff. I don't think we change our setup to accommodate a particular player. So I think if we bring a striker in, we don't see that striker go in and scoring 10, 15 goals between now and May. I don't think we see them 25, 30, because I don't think that we're set up for one player to be the focal point. Obviously, we want more goals. Of course we do. You want a striker at this point of the season in open play to be on 8, 9 goals. But if you've got 8, 9 goals from a couple of players, a striker, a couple of wingers, maybe an attacking midfielder, you're in just as good a place. Arguably better, because an injury doesn't rule them out for too long. And if you look at Ben House, actually he scored plenty of goals. We don't want to bring a player in that now expects to play every single game between now and the end of the season and stump Ben House's growth and development, because Ben House is a good striker. We've got to remember that. I think what we need, in my opinion, and whether it happens or not, I don't know, and I'm not a football manager, you need a player who is either a similar sort of age to House, who's going to come in, who can play as a 2 if we need to play as a 2, or you need a more experienced player who is fit and happy coming on and having kind of 20 minutes here, as well as the odd start, a Connor Wickham style player. And I've always been critical of Wickham, but it's that Connor, not the team, but it's that style of player that I think we need. Somebody who, in the final minutes of a game away at Sheffield Wednesday when it's 0-0 and you want the ball to stick to your centre forward, that you've got a centre forward that the ball sticks to. Dare I even say a John Akindi or a Matt Reed style player, a big lump. That's what I think we would need. I can't see that happening, if I'm honest. I think that if we're moving Tom on and we're looking at freeing up wages, etc., we'd have to buy somebody. I can't see us loaning somebody. If we do loan somebody, it'll mean the end of somebody like Tashan Oakley-Booth, who will almost certainly have to go back to Stoke, and I can't see that happening. So if we buy somebody, it raises a whole lot of new questions. So as to what's available, who's available. You ain't going to buy a 20-goal a season striker out of League One for anything less than £1 million, and we ain't got £1 million to spend. You're not going to buy a 20-goal a season striker out of League Two midway through the season without overspending. We're not going to. The one interesting kind of element could be, are we going to look at a player coming out of the Championship who's failed to make the grade, 6 months left on their contract, that would cost us a similar amount, maybe a couple of grand, 20, 50, 60 grand more, than Hopper's brought us in. That's more likely. And his name gets mentioned. I don't know anything. I can't see it. But actually, Tyler Walker is exactly the type of player that I think that we would look at. And when I say type of player, I don't mean in terms of his profile. I mean in terms of where he is in his career. Stepped up to the Championship a couple of times, failed to make the grade a couple of times. His stock is at a relative all-time low, dare I say. I think if you were signing Tyler Walker last summer or last winter, as Portsmouth did, he was probably more attractive. Since then, he's had a year of nothing, really. And if you were signing him when he left us, he was definitely more attractive. If you were signing him after Mansfield. So his career's at an all-time low, but he's still only 26, 27. He's the type of player I see us bringing in. Good morning to Will Mitson. Owen, I've already touched on that. Will Mitson says, I would take one striker and one midfielder. 2 strikers is a big ask with 5 days to go. 100%, 100%. I would rather take one striker that's going to impact the first team setup and one midfielder that'll impact the first team setup than trying to load up on strikers who ultimately are not going to get game time. And I did the piece, I think, the other day, which you may or may not have seen, about transfer window signings last season. There was only 2 teams that brought 10 goals or more into their squads in the window, and that was us and Bolton. And Bolton's, they signed John Boddy Bob Barson, whatever his name is, the Icelandic fellow. They signed Dion Charles. They signed players who were always going to score goals. We brought in John Marquis, Morgan Whittaker, Liam Cullen. We loaded up on strikers, and look what happened with Liam Cullen. If we were going to have 2 strikers, it would have to then be a return for Tashan Oakley-Booth and another striker coming in. A midfielder is just as important as a striker, by the way, a central midfielder. They're the 2 positions that have to be filled. And if we get to this point next week or whenever the window ends and those two places haven't been filled, then it's time to be critical. It is. Now's not the time to be critical, then is. James Hoy says not many goals to cover if Hopper goes. No, a lot of work rate to cover. Certainly a demographic of player to cover, but certainly not a huge amount of goals. And I think that's the point almost, isn't it? It's the point I've been making, that if we bring 5 or 6 goals in with a striker, but he's fit for 20 games left or 25 games left to the end of the season, however many we've got, 21 games left, then you've probably done your job well. And 6 goals in 21 games won't sound like a lot. It doesn't sound like he's going to be title winning, but if those goals, 3 or 4 of them win your games. Look at John Marquis. He didn't score a lot of goals last season when he came in, but he gave everybody a lift for 3 or 4 games. And those 3 or 4 games were the difference between promotion and relegation. The run in January, where I think we won 3 and 4, was 9 points. Without those 9 points, we would have finished on 43. We would have been safe, but it would have been squeaky bum time right till the end of the final game of the season, which nobody really wanted. Sue Imps says, I think we have some great young lads ready to come in and make an impact like Ben has, and they will benefit from game time even from the bench. I think the likes of Jovan almost certainly will. One of Jovan or Charlie Kendall, I think, will go back out on loan, at least one. I can see that happening. But I think it's great for Jovan to be around the first team. And actually, he's like sneak. And Freddie Draper, of course, not mentioned Freddie. And of the 3, you'd think Jovan's the one that, he's not as good as the other 2. He's kind of been the train of thought. But actually, Jovan's progression has been quite steady. He didn't get a great run at Brackley, but when he's come into the first team, he's looked agile, he's looked big, he's looked strong. And sometimes it's the players that sneak up that do considerably better than the ones that don't. And I'm drawn to an article actually I saw in one of the Echoes that I was researching a piece for, and it was 2 young lads signing permanent deals, and it was Jed Crane and Phil Turner, and there was talk about Jed's already played first team games for the club, and young Phil Turner's it was almost like Phil Turner was the afterthought to Jed Crane. Now Jed was a very good footballer at the level, played for Lincoln United, came in to play for Lincoln. Phil Turner went on to play in the top flight. So it's interesting how sometimes perception of which younger player is better can be skewed by how they're doing at the time, whereas football is very much a career, not a short-term fix. Emma Lou, morning Gary, hope to see some movement very soon. Re-signing seems quiet, hopefully lots of work behind the scenes. Yeah, seems quiet, I think, is because nobody's whispering, nobody's sending direct messages saying we're going to sign this player or that player. There's no rumours coming out because the club are running a really tight ship. It seems quiet, but there's no way that Mark Kennedy and Jez George and the recruitment team and everybody are sat on their fingers or sat on their hands going, we'll see what comes in on the final game of the season. So I'm not panicking yet. I'll panic when the window closes if we haven't got the right players in. I didn't think we'd got the right players in this summer. I thought we lacked a striker. I think that's been evident, but we're still in a decent position. So Mike Smith, Tom's time is up. His work is done. Nice guy, but not a hungry striker like we need. Well, I disagree that we need a hungry striker. I think that we need a functional striker. Yeah, of course, I'm not going to say we don't need a player that scores 10, 15 goals in the next few months. Of course we do. That'd be brilliant. But I think if we sign somebody and the first thing you do is go on Wikipedia and go, well, he hasn't scored many goals this season. I'm not talking you, Mike. I'm talking generally. If somebody does that, you've fallen into that football trap, haven't you? Well, he hasn't got many goals in his career. Do you know what? That sort of take on football for me is just mindless. Just a single solitary output. And I always relate it to sales. I used to work in sales, you may know. I used to work for Howdens and Jewsons and Jacksons. And you could be in a department that did very few sales and was really poor, but you were a good salesperson. So if you then moved on and your prospective employer said, oh, you were at that branch, well, it failed, didn't it? It went through the floor. Yet your sales accounted for 80% of that branch failing. Are you a good person to be employing or a bad person? So it's too easy. Too easy. Morning, Nat. Chef Wednesday fan by the looks of things. Hope you're well, pal. Best of luck in every game this season, bar the one that we play you, of course. Shane Clark, Gimdy was also voted in the PFA team player of the PFA team of the year, voted by his fellow pros. Know who I'd rather listen to, Fat Dave in the pub or pro footballer? Yeah. Heard numerous times that John Akindi was a footballer's footballer. And perception from the stands is always skewed. And I know that because of the penalty the other week on that I thought we should have got on Ben House. I think it was against Ipswich. At the time, you're looking at it going, grrr, it's a penalty. And then you look back and go, actually, it wasn't. Opinion was skewed. So just because John Akindi didn't chase a couple of balls, there was this, John Akindi's lazy. Yeah, is he really though? Because players love playing with him, just like players love playing with Tom Hopper. Players love playing with Matt Reed because they made the game easier for them. And it's another thing players like, shouldn't say it, Conor McGrandle, Scott Kerr, they made the game easier for the players around them. So, John Wade, people's expectations need to be lowered. We're punching well above our weight. You get what you pay for, and to pay the money needed to guarantee a goal scorer would be contrary to the business plan and our wallet. Survival will come, but through frees, gambles, and loans. As much as some won't like that, the bigger picture, our club's future has to be the priority. And there we go. Comment of the day. I thought it was going to be Shane Clark, but John Wade has stolen it from us. Yeah, quite right. Quite right. And just because you sign loan players and free players and players who have had injury troubles in the past, that's not something to be critical of. It's a business plan. If Lincoln City went out and spent £1 million, or let's say £500,000, let's be realistic. Let's say we've got £500,000 spent. We haven't, but let's say we have. And we went out and we go, right, we're going to sign this player. And he comes in and everyone knows he's the big sign-in and he doesn't score for 3 months. What then? We need to sign someone else. It was poor recruitment. Where's your £500,000 gone? We can't be taking that risk with the club's future. Bolton can. Bolton are a big club. Bolton get 15, 16,000 fans. They've been in the Premier League. They're backed. And when I say backed, I don't mean our board are not backing the club. Of course they are. Bolton Wanderers is just a bigger club. They make more money. It's that simple. And so they can outspend us, as can Ipswich spending a couple of million on Nathan Broadhead, as can Sheffield Wednesday, who, are a Premier League sized club in the waiting. They can all outspend us. You won't see Port Vale or Exeter City or Cambridge United or Bristol Rovers paying £500,000 for a striker. Why? Because they're similar sized clubs to us and they have to do similar things to us. They'll be signing loan players. They'll be picking players out of non-league. They'll be taking free agents later in the window, or they'll be taking players whose contracts are coming up later in the window. That's what clubs like us do. And that's what you have to do. And so we'll be looking for the best value in that market. That's the market we should be shopping in. And when I hear things like we've lost out to a player to Ipswich Town, I find it a little frustrating. 2-3 years ago, Morgan Rogers turned down Ipswich Town to come to us because of there was the wage cap. We were able to compete in terms of wages. It was a footballing decision. But it's easy now to say, well, it could be a football decision again. But if Ipswich Town offer you 10 grand a week and Lincoln City offer you 4 grand a week, where are you going to go? If you're Lincoln City and you offer a striker 10 grand a week and everyone else in the squad's on 2-3 grand a week or whatever, what's he going to do to the squad? But people don't have this in their mind. All they see is things like Football Manager and FIFA and how easy it is. I went and got this player because I know who he is. I went and got that player because I know who he is. That's why Tyler Walker always gets mentioned. That's why Michael Bridges always used to get mentioned. Because the strikers that you know who they are the ones who are going to do well. That's the logic. I understand where the logic comes from. Andy Blackburn, good morning. I agree with you about Tom Hopper. That's good to hear, Andy. Thank you. Ben Ward, Tom's the perfect example of a captain off the field. Just a shame with his injuries and struggling as a lone striker. He's not had the season we'd like him to have seen. 2 seasons, I'd say. But yeah, quite right. Quite right. Kev Green's on board. Good morning, pal. Hope you're well. Paul Norton, how you doing, my friend? I hope playing with one striker at this level, it never seems to work. Get 2 back up top. Yeah, do you know what? I like the 3 at the back when you play with the 2 up top. So I like a kind of a 3-5-2. So 3 centre halves, 3 central midfielders, but 2 wide players who are kind of wing backs and attackers. But it takes a special kind of player to play in that role as the wing back. You know, high energy. You can easily get caught out against bigger teams. So I can understand why we go with what is effectively they call it a 3-4-3, but it's not, is it? That's 1 up top. It's almost like a 3-6-1, to be fair. Les says, would love to see Jovan get a run in the team, perhaps in a 2 with House. They appear to be complementary in their styles. Yes, but then I think that a run in the team can also ruin a young player quite quickly. And so I can understand why we're trying to manage Jovan a little better. As I say, I think Jovan will probably go out on loan. I think that he would do well to go out on loan in the National League North, again, to a mid-table National League North team that want to actually play him. I don't see him going back to Gainsborough. I think that would be a step back too far. But I think that he would do well go into a National League North team. But we'll see. We'll see. Mike Smith says he's the only striker I know who doesn't take penalties. I don't see that being an issue. Some of the best penalty takers ever, like Sir David Unsworth and Matt Letizia, weren't strikers. Paul Norton, do we know is Kendall injured? No idea, mate, I'm afraid. I think with Kendall, he is somebody that has to play in a 2. I don't think you can play Charlie in a 1 up top. So it's interesting whether if we keep him and then later in games where we have been going to a 2 and we've been putting Danny Mandrio into the middle or Jack Diamond, whether we maybe look at going Charlie Kendall and the striker. Kendall and House, not so sure, but Kendall and a new striker, a bit bigger, a bit stronger, potentially so. Sean Simmons says Cornell always seems to be in the know. Yep, that's why we signed Hal Robson-Kanu. Jonathan Cousins Booth, how are we doing, mate? Who would you be targeting to come in as a Tom Hopper replacement? Good question. One that I'm going to really struggle to answer because I fall into the trap of only knowing the players that I know, if that makes sense. I'll be honest, and it's an easy and it's a lazy thing to say. I really think Tyler Walker. I think that he is prime Lincoln City fair now. I think he would cost less in terms of an outlay. I think that his stock is lower, so perhaps his wage demands are lower. I don't think an Ipswich or a team like that go in for Tyler Walker because they've got better options. You know, even a Sheffield Wednesday, a Bolton, they've all got better options up top. Given his form, yeah, I think that Tyler, if he's moving from Coventry, he's going to a Lincoln or a Bristol Rovers or a Port Vale or somebody like that. And then we should be able to compete with them. It just depends if one of them goes, well, actually, we're going to pay big money for a striker. And you look at Bristol Rovers, you know, they've got John Marquis, they've got Aaron Collins. Are they going to break the bank to bring in a Tyler Walker? I don't know. And also, you know, there's potential loan players. There's the boy that was at Derby, Asula, who I think that we were hoping to sign in the summer. Potentially, if Tashan left, then there's that angle as well. And then I think probably you can get better value for money in the summer window. So we shall see. Kev Sewell, morning, Gary. The clown says, see you Saturday. Oh, yes, we'll all be at the circus on Saturday, Kev. Tell him we'll see him then. He can get the beers in if he wants before or after, because I'm out and about in town. Michael Speedy Vanderson, can we guarantee Tom Hopper going to League Two team that we will get the right price for him to be able to use what we get for him on a similar player? From what I saw, Tom Hopper would be going to a championship team. We get the asking price for him, right? There's no asking price, mate. He's out of contract in 6 months' time. What we get for him is a bonus. So I think he's never going to go into the championship in a million years. I think he understands that. We understand that. At the end of the day, anything we get for Tom's a bonus. Absolutely bonus. Nick Oxbury, morning, mate. You well? Well, I'm as well as I was last night when you were messaging me incessantly, Nick. So, yeah, no problem at all. No whispers, though, mate, again, I'm afraid. Richard Godson, morning, Gary. Sounds like I've missed most of this, so I'll have to listen to the whole thing later. Yep, the whole thing will be available later on YouTube. I'm not going to put it up as an actual podcast, so you'll be able to see it on YouTube and Facebook. Still, And Jonathan says, good call with TW. Tyler Walker would give same energy as Marquis did last season, would also able to play anywhere across the front if needed. I think that's interesting as well. There's less of that these days, isn't there? Of strikers who play out wide. And again, while I've been researching articles, I've seen talk of when Lee Thorpe played out wide, and when he moved into the centre, he was more effective. I remember us playing Ben Tomlinson out wide. I remember, when we had Taylor, Fletcher, Yeo, and Franny Green up front, two of those played out wide and one through the middle. So I think that happens less and less now. But somebody like Walker potentially can. I don't want us to do that. I don't want us to sign a player who can play up top, like a Jordan Garrick, who can play through the middle, can play here, can play there. I would like to see us sign a dedicated striker. I think. So James Hoy, and this is a really good comment, and it's a good one to kind of begin to wind up on. So whether it be John Wade, poor old John, I'm messing him about today, John Wade or Shane Clarks, it's up there. Top 3 comments, Shane, John and James. We already have one of the most promising strikers in League One in-house for me, not concerned about Hopper going at all. I'm not concerned about Tom Hopper leaving the football club either, James. We do need to bring a striker in. Whether Tom stayed or not, we needed to bring a striker in because he hadn't been performing to the level that I think we wanted. But it's not a panic station. I'm not looking at it thinking, what are we going to do now? Because if we let him go, somebody's going to come in. It's fact. We ain't going to go into the last few weeks of the last couple of months of the season without bringing another striker in, even if it's a lone player who has to fight for one of the spots. It ain't going to happen. And I'm not worried. The only worry would be if Ben House picked up an injury, and that's what the club have to mitigate against. But all these people saying, well, we have to sign a striker now. It's almost like saying we've run out of milk, going, we have to go and buy some milk now. We know. And in my opinion, I'll live and die, I'll fall on my sword here if I have to. But if Tom Hopper's going, we're going to sign a striker. And I think that's almost accepted fact. I think that we wouldn't sell him if there wasn't a striker coming in. I think Michael Horton wouldn't have had it. His sources are likely to be at the club, so he wouldn't have been reporting that a deal could be done by the weekend if it wasn't going to happen. My understanding from the kind of the media side of things is that a deal's already done, and I just wonder if it's a case of us now trying to get our target in and announcing the two at a similar time. If you hear Tom goes and we don't immediately announce someone, don't panic. We're going to sign somebody. Ben House is a good striker. And he's come on in leaps and bounds. This is a kid that I think he played for Scotland under 21s or something like that. He's got the ability, he works hard, he harasses, he chases. All of his goals have been from open play. They've been against big clubs. He's not one of these that turns up and scores in he's got 8 goals, but 7 of them are in the EFL trophy. He scores big goals that win football matches. He doesn't go missing in those big games. He's one of the most promising strikers at this division. And if we were to then go out and spend £500,000 on, let's say, Joe Pigott at Portsmouth, player I really like, kind of profile of player I think would do well for us. Strong, you can use him as a target man, can finish. Let's say we go spend £500,000 on him. What does that then say to Ben House? What does that then do for Ben House's development? And at the end of the day, we've got to look at developing players. Ben House, let's say he finishes this season with, he's what on now, 8 goals. Let's say he finishes with 15 goals this season, and then September or August comes around and he scores 4 in 5 at the beginning of the next season. Ben House is a £500,000, £750 player for anybody in the Championship. He's the right age. You've got to look at things like that. Tom Hopper has come to the end of his life with Lincoln. I don't think he was ever a player that we expected to sell on for £500,000. I think he was a player that we expected to be functional in the team. And there are two, we talk about the model all the time, but we're not just always going to sign players we can pass on and pass up the chain. Conor McGrandles, I think, was always going to be a player. Cost us nothing, comes in, does a job, goes. Joe Walsh, cost us nothing, comes in, does a job, at the end of his contract, goes. So there are those types of players. That was Tom. Ben's the other type. He's got to be the type of player that we look to develop. And the key is finding the balance between the players who come in and are functional and the players who come in to develop. You've got to find that balance. And that, I think, is one of the main reasons that Lincoln City and Michael Appleton parted company last year, because we didn't find that balance. Because in meaningless games at the end of the season, we were still leaving Max Sanders on the bench. Sean Rowan was not getting games for us. They're the players that we've got to try and develop. And it was players like Chris Maguire that were getting games, who was always going to be a functional player. And Nick Pudsey says, we don't create enough chances, whoever we have up front. And we don't create enough chances in some games, Nick. In some games, actually, we do create chances. And when you do, it can often get lost because of all the times that you don't. And I think about Accrington at home, drew 1-1, came away, people saying we don't create enough chances. Actually, we created something like 7 on target that night. But there's a perception that because it was only 1-1 against Accrington Stanley, and because the Charlton game or another game where we'd struggled to create chances was close by, there's a perception that it's just more of the same. It's not always the case. In some games we struggled against MK Dons, but that was more because we let them have possession. I think we went to MK Dons and thought, well, if we don't get beat here, we can target the 2 home games as the wins. And if you come out with 7 from 9, you're laughing. That might not be a tactic people like, but football's very methodical. Michael Appleton used to have a chart up at the training ground on the wall, and it used to have a number for every month, and that month was how many points he wanted from that month. And he'd look at each game and we'll go, we'll take a draw there, we'll win there, and we'll lose that. That'll be 4 points. We'll have 8 points from that month. So there were some games he knew he was going to go into and thought a draw will do us here. We do that. We do it now. We'll go and we'll try and nick something. But if we draw at Barnsley, we draw at Ipswich, we're in good place. If we draw against Ipswich at home and Bolton, we're not in a bad place. And Sue, finally, because I'm nearly at the end of my dog walk now, the striker turned us down in the summer as Tom was captain, didn't think he would get game time. So that's a possibility now. Depends who and depends what type of player it was. So if it was a permanent signing, possibly not now an option, because he now might cost more money. It might have to be somebody who was coming in on loan, and we've got to be careful with the loan market. I'm all for exploiting it. I'm all for having 5 loan players in your squad. That's football now. It's the way it goes. But if you've suddenly got 6 loan players in your squad, 7 if we were to sign another, and you have to start leaving some out, sends the wrong message to the teams you're borrowing from. And you soon find that you're only borrowing turkeys on purpose, not by accident. So when we've borrowed players who haven't worked out, like Dan and Lundlow and Jordan Garrick, it hasn't been because they're bad players. It's because something hasn't worked out, the environment, injuries, whatever. Whereas if you get to a point where you'll just borrow anybody, or you're borrowing 7 and going, well, we're not going to play your player every other game, then you're in a little bit more trouble with who you're borrowing from. So there we go, end of story. Craig Green says goals win games. Lincoln needs someone to stick it in the onion bag. We've got them. It's, again, Craig, at the end of the day, our survival won't depend on us signing a player that's going to score 10 goals this season. It comes from all over the field. And if we bring a striker in like Morgan Whittaker, who scored 3 or 4, like John Marquis, who scored 3 or 4, I'll be perfectly happy with that. I really will. And if you look at all the teams that win divisions, yeah, maybe you need a 20-goal a season striker to win a division. We didn't need a 20-goal a season striker to get within 90 minutes of the Championship. We didn't need a 20-goal a season striker to win League Two. I don't even think we had a 20-goal a striker when we season striker when we won the National League. So actually, yeah, goals do win games, but if they all come from one person, you put all your eggs in one basket. And I think that that's a fallacy. So if we bring a striker in who can score, as Tom did in the playoff season, as Reedy did in the National League season, which is what, 15 in total, which would be 7 in half a season, which is what Ben House has more or less already got now. So if we bring somebody in that has the ability to chip in and do that, I'll be perfectly happy. And as I say, if you've joined me late, if we do sign a player, I don't know if we are or not, but if we do, and you go on Wikipedia and you see that he hasn't scored 20 a season for the last 4 seasons, it doesn't mean he's shit. I can't stress that enough. I can't stress it enough. I really can't. It means nothing at all. Look at Matt Reed. When he came in, you could have looked at Wikipedia and gone, well, he was playing at Hucknall or wherever it was 2 years ago. He must be shit. Was he shit? No, he wasn't. Right, well, that's me done and dusted. Look, amazing. Bit of transfer discussion. So it's going to be quick. We're 43 minutes in, and at one point there was 111 of you watching. So I really appreciate that. I can't believe people watch me do my dog walk. I sometimes forget that I've even got real people watching. So I appreciate all of your time. Podcast will be, who's editing it? Ben. So it'll be out tomorrow morning, likely to be kind of lunchtime-ish. You might get it out early. But obviously Ben can be quite busy with a couple of his gaming sites, so don't put too much pressure on him to get it out. So keep an ear out for that. You can hear everything that I've just said again, but this time with me taking the piss out of Ben every so often rather than reading your comments, which is bound to be funny. We'll do a preview of the Cambridge game. I've got an article coming out later. Ben says it'll be out at 6 in the morning. Good man, thank you, Ben. I've got an article coming out later that's relating to something that happened in League One this week. So something big happened in League One this week. I'm sure we all laughed at. So I've got a Lincoln City related article coming out to that. I'll probably get that out after 5 o'clock when I finish my real job. So keep an eye out for that. Rob Scott is the last one. He says morning, just as I'm going. Morning, Rob Scott. Hope you're well, my friend. Everybody else, take care. Up the imps.